The door was locked from the outside. 146 people found that out at the same time. The Asch Building stood at the corner of Green Street and Washington Place in Manhattan. 10 floors, advertised as fireproof. It was fireproof. That is not sarcasm. The building survived almost completely intact. It is still standing today. It simply had nothing in it to stop the people inside from burning. The Triangle Shirtwaist Company occupied the top 3 floors, 8th, 9th, and 10th. Around 500 people worked there making shirtwaists, a woman's blouse, the fashionable garment of the decade. Most of the workers were women. Most were immigrants, Italian and Eastern European Jewish. Most were between 16 and 23 years old. The 2 youngest were Kate Leonin and Asch Building and Rosario Maltese. Both were 14 years old. 2 years before the fire, these workers went on strike. In the autumn of 1909, the Triangle workers walked out. It spread. 20,000 shirtwaist workers across New York joined them. It became the largest strike by women that America had ever seen. The strike was about wages, hours, and union recognition. Triangle's owners fought it hard. They hired men to break up the picket line. The police arrested strikers rather than the men attacking them. When it ended in 1910, many shops settled with the union. Triangle was one of the firms that refused recognition, so there was no union in that building. No grievance procedure, no mechanism by which a worker who found a locked door could do anything about a locked door except push on it. There is something else that belongs here because it changes how you read everything that follows. Blanck and Harris had a history with fire. Their factories had burned before. The Triangle Works burned in 1902. Their other company, Diamond Waste, burned in 1907 and again in 1910. Every one of those fires began at outside working hours when the buildings were empty. Everyone produced an insurance claim. Nobody was ever charged with anything, and it was never proven, and it should not be stated as though it were. But it does explain something otherwise strange. Their insurers had pushed them to install sprinklers. They declined. Sprinklers are expensive. A sprinkler system also makes a fire considerably harder to profit from. Under the cutting tables on the 8th floor sat bins of fabric scraps, months of cotton offcuts, waiting on the rag dealer. Cotton scrap is extraordinarily flammable. This was not a secret. Everyone in the trade knew it. A fire prevention expert had written to the company recommending fire drills. He received no reply. At about 4:40 in the afternoon on Saturday, the 25th of March, 1911, a fire started in one of those bins. The cause was never established. The likeliest explanation is a discarded match or a cigarette. Smoking was forbidden in the factory. The men smoked anyway. Management knew, and nothing was done about it. Within roughly a minute, the 8th floor was alight. It was near the end of the shift. People were collecting their coats and their pay envelopes. A bookkeeper on the 8th floor telephoned the 10th floor to warn them. The 10th floor got out. Nearly everyone up there reached the roof and crossed to the buildings next door. Students from the university next door lowered ladders to them. Nobody telephoned the 9th floor. There was no alarm system in the building. No fire drill had ever been held there. The 9th floor learned there was a fire when the fire arrived on the 9th floor. Roughly 260 people were working on 9. There were 2 stairwells. One was already impassable. The other was locked. This is the fact the entire story turns on, so it is worth being precise. The Washington Place stairwell door on the 9th floor was locked. Survivors testified that they pushed, that it did not move, that people stacked up behind it until they could not breathe. This was deliberate company practice. Doors were locked during shifts to stop workers leaving with stolen goods, and to funnel everyone out through one exit where their bags could be searched on the way past. There was a fire escape. One, narrow iron at the rear. It did not reach the ground. It stopped at the 2nd floor, above a covered courtyard. Roughly 20 people got onto it. It buckled under the weight in the heat, tore away from the wall, and collapsed. Everyone on it fell about 100 feet. The fire department arrived within minutes. They were fast, they were competent. It made almost no difference. Their tallest ladder reached the 6th floor. The fire was on the 8th and the 9th. They held out life nets. The nets were rated for a fall of roughly 70 feet. People were falling from 100. The bodies went straight through the canvas and struck the pavement. 62 people went out of the windows. Some jumped, some were pushed by the crush behind them. Witnesses on the street described people standing on the ledges, quite still, and then stepping off in a way that looked almost considered. A reporter wrote that he learned a new sound that day and that he hoped never to hear it again. The two passenger lifts ran until they physically could not. The operators, Joseph Zito and Gaspar Mortillolo, went back up again and again. They saved a great many people. Eventually, the rails warped in the heat and the car stopped. Some people jumped into the shaft and landed on the roof of a stalled car. A few of them survived it. The fire itself was over quickly, under half an hour from ignition to control. 146 people died, 123 women and 23 men. Catherine Maltese worked on the 9th floor with her 2 daughters. Lucia was 20, Rosaria was 14. All 3 died. The family buried a mother and both her children on the same day. The bodies were laid out on a covered pier on the East River for identification. Families walked the rows for days. Some found people by a ring, or a darned stocking, or a mended hem they recognized because they had mended it themselves. 6 were never identified. They stayed unidentified for 100 years. Their names were finally established by a researcher in 2011. 350,000 people marched in the funeral procession, in the rain, for the unidentified dead. A week after the fire, at a memorial meeting at the Metropolitan Opera House, a union organizer named Rose Schneiderman stood in front of a room full of wealthy reformers who had come to express their sympathy. She told them this was not the first time girls had been burned alive in that city. She told them the life of men and women was cheap there, and property was sacred. She said there were so many of them for one poor dress and shirtwaist worker. She was 29 years old. The room did not much care for it. Max Blanck and Asch Harris owned the Triangle Shirtwaist company. They were on the 10th floor when the fire began. They escaped across the roof. In December of 1911, they were tried for manslaughter. The prosecution had a specific and difficult problem, not proving the door was locked. They could show that. They had to prove that Blanck and Harris knew it was locked on that day at that hour, which is a hard thing to prove about 2 men 3 floors above it. The jury acquitted them. Several jurors said afterwards that they personally believed the door had been locked and that they still could not convict on what the prosecution had put in front of them. Then the insurance paid. Blanck and Harris were carrying more cover than their documented losses. They collected roughly $60,000 more than the fire had cost them. That works out at about $400 for every person who died. 23 families sued. In 1914, the company settled out of court, $75 per life. In 1913, Max Blanck was in court again. His new factory had been found with a door locked during working hours. He was fined $20. The judge apologized to him for the inconvenience. Frances Perkins was having tea a few streets away when it started. She walked over and watched people come out of the windows. 22 years later, she became Secretary of Labor, the first woman in an American cabinet. She said plainly and repeatedly that the New Deal began the day the Triangle factory burned. New York State convened a factory investigating commission. Over 4 years, it produced 36 new laws. Fire drills made compulsory. Sprinklers required above a certain height. Doors required to open outward. Doors required to stay unlocked while anybody was inside the building. Almost every fire exit you have walked past in your life, the outward swing, the push bar, the rule that it cannot be chained while people are at work, all of it traces back through those 36 laws to one stairwell door. The Asch Building is the Brown Building now. It belongs to New York University. There is a plaque on the corner. People walk past it all day without looking up. Here is what the record does not resolve. Everything the Triangle fire supposedly taught was already known before it happened. The scrap bins were a known hazard. The locked doors were a known practice. The workers had struck over conditions in that building 2 years earlier and been refused. The fire escape's inadequacy had been noted. Fire drills had already been recommended in writing to that company and ignored. So the deaths did not produce the knowledge. The knowledge was already in the building, being ignored on purpose, by men who had done the arithmetic and found that a locked door was cheaper. What the 146 deaths produced was the political cost of continuing to ignore it. Those are 2 different things. And it is worth being honest about which one of them actually wrote the law.